Ah, I sure do love the cookout we have every year at the local army base. Oh no, we're just about out of bratwurst. Hey, Sergeant Johnson, go get the brats.
A few moments later.
Not what I meant, but I can work with that. Sergeant, leave them here and get the title card.
The story will continue after this.
Thanks for getting those hot dogs, Sergeant. Now who's ready to learn about military brats? Military brat, while seeming like a rude term, is a child or children of active duty military personnel for the United States Armed Forces, frequently moving between bases in different states and even nations. 15 million Americans are or have been military brats, which is about roughly 5% going after 2020 population figures. And brats are not just American, but they are a US subculture, which is more prevalent due to not so obvious reasons. So we're staying here since the research into the American branch of the subculture is deep enough already. Brats also exist in a lot of the Commonwealth as a term, which itself comes from about the 1800s, just under the term little traveler, to describe the children who ventured with their parents on military expeditions. The origin of them being called military brats is still unknown, but it is likely that some soldier back in 18 or 1900s offhandedly referred to his children as such, and then the term stuck. As an American subculture though, the history behind brats is a bit longer than this. Camp followers, a term which is still used today, are, or well were, people who would follow the military camps around. They'd either be families of soldiers, or people who could profit off of having things the armies didn't. Mostly vices like booze and prostitution, or just goods not found in a kit bag. The practice had been around for a long time. So long that I don't have a definite start date aside from it was a practice before the 19th century. So for people wanting an exact number, we're going to go with the year 1543. Why is that? Well, because of Long Meg of Westminster, an English camp follower during the Italian Wars. She's the oldest camp follower I could find, and because of that, we're skipping over European military history. Thanks, Meg. In American history, military families followed the soldiers much like in the old country, with some of the oldest recorded cases coming from the Revolutionary War. So, in the camps, one could see the regular types of camp followers, but with them were children, running around and doing tomfuckery with the rifles. These children would usually be extra hands for their mothers, who, much like camp followers of old, would take care of duties like sewing, cleaning, and nursing. It wouldn't be till after wars like the Civil War you'd not see women and children anywhere near camps, aside from Red Cross nurses and some professional women who offered a good time, and it continues to be that way. I'll give you one guess why. It was preferred that women and children stayed away from the camps that could oh so easily be overrun at the wrong time. But how are we going to keep these military families in the military and away from war? I have no idea. Let's ask the US Army. Wow, that was quick. And they encrypted all of it. Not to worry, it might take a minute, but we'll decrypt this information about the history of military housing. In the meantime, enjoy footage from the World Wars set to tasteful, easy listening music from the 90s. There we go. The history of military housing. Originally, housing was reserved for officers and high-ranking men who were not thought to be single. But by the beginnings of World War II, Congress had built 25,000 family housing quarters to cater to both the married officer and the enlisted grunt. Additional houses were built on bases throughout the country, but while they were mostly for officers, these homes would help create the on-base culture that shaped countless brats. Even as the second mediocre death battle of nations came to a close, houses were being built for these new families. And while Air Force pilots and their wives were helping create children through wild swingers parties, baby brat numbers would boom with I think I've lost the phrase. It's like a post-war infant explosion. Child candidate? No, kid kaboom? Oh, there it is. Toddler barrage. The same could be said for the boom in the number of American bases that saw more than just young men hiding behind the barbed wire and checkpoints. Domestically, through government actions like the Cape Heart program and creating the Defense Housing Commission, the amount of homes for military families grew 10 times since the 30s. But while everything was looking good behind the picket fences and backyard barbecues of the home front, the world would enter a war that couldn't be won with only the home fires burning. Yep, we're fighting proxy wars for the next 50 years against those damn commies. So, If you couldn't have guessed from the military buildup of nuclear missiles and men in black suits, the US expanded the bases in Europe, Asia, and even the Caribbean. These new bases needed soldiers, and some of those soldiers wanted families, so the government did the only thing they could do: build more houses. The American government built these mini USAs in many ports of call for strategic reasons, but for morale reasons, they needed to include more than just barracks and landing strips. And so, American culture was integrated into these bases, with shops, restaurants, and even movie theaters for soldiers to enjoy. Families would also be able to live on base and go to school overseas if the base had any housing for them. We don't know how many bases outside the US have housing on them, but there are roughly about 390,000 on-base houses throughout the domestic as of 1996. Yep, the military usually keeps things under wraps for a good while. But we can find some information after the decade ends. Just not any cool numbers. At the beginning of the 21st century, but after the whole 9/11 thing, we would see something happening in the US Armed Forces that wasn't really common beforehand. With the age of enlistment being lowered to 18 back in the 60s and women being allowed to serve since the Second World War, a majority of the US Armed Forces had a small minority of two-parent households who are both active duty. It's more common nowadays, with high school grads standing up for the benefits that come with active duty. There's a good chance couples join together or hook up on base, even if only one is in the military. Currently, there are around 600 bases internationally. Some of these are just temporary, but larger ones like Ramstein and Canada have been housing families since their construction. And so here you would see a generation of brats who grew up on American soil within foreign soil, but some did not like the idea of brats being born. In 2014, two authors proposed the idea of the term champs, as they saw the term brat held offense to some, only for the wider brat community to shut it down. They believed that while offensive in certain contexts, the term brat was part of the complete military culture they grew up with. The embracing of the term brat isn't the only thing that comes from military brat culture. They get the same things their parents did: indoctrination into military society, because for all we know, war is on the horizon, and
we must all get ready now.
Thanks in part to military sociology, the study of militaries as more a society and not just government-sanctioned shooters, we here in the studio have a good chunk of knowledge on what military culture is, at least in the US. Most of what we will be covering is going to be about life on bases for these brats. Luckily, they don't send children into war anymore. There always exists on base a perpetual readiness for war. It's something brats grow used to. Soldiers could get the call that some country invaded our ally or that oil was discovered in New Brunswick. Within a few hours, they're on a plane somewhere. That readiness to get your gear and go is passed on to their children. It's been compared to theater by many brats. And much like theater, you have the stars and the understudies. In this case of the military, it's the enlisted and the officers. Life on base is where theatrical performance of combat families come into full force. While there are differences for international and domestic bases, chiefly that international bases are American enclaves, they are negligible at the moment. On base, the military brat and family are part of a unit, maybe even a platoon, and they should perform each role suited for said unit. The soldiers serve, of course, while the families maintain the home front and strive under the military system to become shining beacons of the communities they neighbor. According to Wirch's work, military brats have more ease taking leadership roles in school activities like theater or honor societies due to the culture they grew up with. Off-base is different. There's less of a security net for many of the non-officers and their families than what is offered behind the gates. In the rare case of funds being frozen when moving between bases, like what has happened to some enlisted families moving between international bases, they have to live outside the base. This is a hardship of itself, with one case in Wirch's book ending in suicide, while other military families adjusted to their new environments. But those families still go on, trying to integrate with the community around them and hit or miss success. Military life is just a regimen of tasks for everyone in the whole family, and there are both good and bad things that come out of this. So, without a segue, pros and cons are like a coin, something I realized we should have done for the segment title card. Like any Army recruiter, I'm going to let you know the pros of military brat lifestyle so that you can see how any potential children can benefit from living in the gun places. I think I'm having a stroke. Hey, did Chris write this? Military culture for children could be described rather humorously as gateway culture. If they are lucky, or unlucky, enough to join their parents overseas on base, they can experience a variety of cultures, but the same could even be said for living within the States. With bases all over the nation, the brats on the home front have all changed homes at least once, and home for them usually means whoever or whatever they make it. This adaptability from change is another pro of the brat lifestyle. Many learn to think quickly on their feet to survive and thrive in new school and cultural environments, picking up on traits quickly. Quick thinking and discipline are two traits the military likes to instill on the brats. Both of these contribute to a better than average academic career, with higher college graduation rates and GPAs than their non-brat counterparts, and even better family lives, with lower divorce rates for many former brats. This discipline translates to a lot of places, and it's thanks to the strict military system of finish what you start and train until it's perfect that keep them going. On the other side of the military culture coin, there are downsides to growing up Army strong. So here's a few takeaways from that. Now, I'm a fan of the nomadic lifestyle, despite never fully doing it myself due to college, and there is a good reason it's on a con list, even with this bias. If you can't tell from the name itself, a nomadic lifestyle usually results in its participants uprooting everything and moving elsewhere. It was more common back before nations formed, with folks like the Cossacks or Pavi moving from place to place. And now it applies to military families and people who want to work remotely from some cafe in Thailand with the cute short-haired waitress in a miniskirt who gave me a wink before his shift was over. And while with my bias, I see this as a good way to experience a new culture, with the exception of you never fully integrating into it and living more as a work tourist, while having flexibility. But that's the inverse of what happens to military brats. Military families relocate more often than civilians, with 1 in 3 compared to 1 in 20 doing so each year. This sets up many brats with the mindset of not associating with many in their schools. And while they do have the social skills to get to the top of any social hierarchy, this only lasts as long as they're in that one school before everything has to start all over. So brats are less likely to form strong friendships with others. There was a case in one of our source books where a former brat set it up every few years he would pack up and move somewhere else in New York City, effectively killing many of the friendships he had beforehand. Disassociation doesn't stop there. While there is a hint of home culture within the States, it gets a bit worse going international, which leads to the term coined by both anthropologists and sociologists, a third culture kid. Third culture kid applies to the international brats because they are at a convergence of 2 or more cultures. They grow up with an American, apple pie and baseball base life while experiencing whatever culture surrounds their little exclave. They have troubles adapting to these new cultures, but do pick up on some of the more universal traits of the world. One can call them outsiders to what we see as normal regardless of culture. There's a quote from Mary Wirch's Military Brats that resonates more with the nomadic feel of the brat. Home for me was the comfortable familiarity of constant change in an uncharted future. Brats grew up much like the Tartars and Bedouins, moving continuously, sometimes without notice. They get accustomed to it, not adopting themselves at the next place they set up in. Like we said before in the program, brats are less likely to make close friends at school due to this endless relocation. Perfectionism is something the military prides itself in, sometimes outdated vehicles and equipment being in working order, the whole logistical thing, and, my favorite, soldiers doing those cool flips with rifles while doing drill. And said soldiers, especially officers, expect their children to live the same regimented life as they have done. Some psychologists have seen parallels between brats and children of alcoholics. A bit redundant, as, according to some of Wirch's study, about 1 in 3 military families suffer from alcohol-related problems. Now, how does this tie into perfectionism? Well, perfectionists and alcoholics suffer from a few key takeaways. Both constantly judge themselves without mercy, overreact to situations in which they have little or no control, and both have troubles following a project through to the end. But where the perfectionist and the brat connect greatly is that both want control over life. Both strive to be high achievers for parental approval, the perfectionist more for the unrealistic standards they keep setting, and the brat for the unrealistic standards the military gave their parents to set for children. Where they differ is that the brat, however, strives more to be the person everyone comes to for all their problems. They see themselves as more perfect from this military upbringing and feel they can help even the worst of problems their friends have. It's something that has been present since ancient times, separating the commanders from their men for more aristocratic reasons. This translates to brats as well. 2 viewpoints are covered in Wirch's work. One, the daughter of a sergeant in Germany, who befriended twin girls of a major. Upon arriving to what she didn't know was a birthday party, the girl's mother and other guests there were not at all happy to see her. She was furious. It wasn't what she said, but how she behaved. I understood that it was because my dad wasn't an officer. And class hatred isn't just one way. Just ask the officer of a general in some on-base school in the States. I'd always had to fight the school bully, just because I was the general's kid, and the school bully was probably an NCO's kid, and that was my introduction to every school I went to. With him further saying that hostility between the children echoed the invisible hatred between the 2 classes of soldier. There also existed a race difference in with the class differences as well, with non-white officers being treated marginally worse than their white counterparts, and it being the same for the children. But that's institutional racism for you. It sinks into a lot of parts of whatever state you fight for. Luckily, many brat children try to see beyond this, seeing everyone as just another set of boots on the ground and another comrade to fight beside. Now that was interesting, wasn't it, kids? Sergeant Johnston, get these brats some ice cream. I'm gonna finish up the episode. And there you have it, military brats. From children who just stuck with their parents in camps to on-base youths who get immersed in more culture than one could ever want. The military brat was there. While we didn't really touch on any of the other brat subcultures outside the US, they do share some similarities to the children of the world's most expensive army. And while there is still conflict, there will still be soldiers. While there are still soldiers, there'll be brats.